Preventive Medicine and the Rational Male, Positive Masculinity. And you can find more of Rollo's work at therationalmale.com. And you can also follow him on Twitter at /rationalmale. Great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. I believe if I go to the table of contents or the index, the word that comes up the most often is hypergamy. And this is a word that, we all know the word misogyny, and we all know the cliche of the man who trades in his middle-aged wife for a young hottie and so on. We all know that. But hypergamy is one of these phenomenon that's kind of like the physics of sexual dynamics, which people don't really seem to know about at all. And it should be central to our discussion. So I wonder if you could give a brief introduction to this issue or question.
Okay. I'm glad you asked, because when I was just at the 21 convention back in September, I gave my first kind of public talk, and I did two talks. The first one was about hypergamy, and I titled it, Hypergamy Micro to Macro. And I think that we can trace women's the dynamic of women's hypergamy from, as basic as the ovulatory cycle and ovulatory shift, all the way up to where we are right now with Hillary Clinton trying to become the first female president. And you can trace from very simple beginnings, very biological beginnings, through personal and psychological dynamics, and then up into individual and social dynamics, and then into political dynamics and even religious dynamics after that are all founded on hypergamy. Now, a lot of people want to say, and I always lock horns with these guys, is that they always want to say that hypergamy should just mean a woman's tendency to marry up. And I really feel that doesn't do justice to hypergamy right now, simply because it's so much more than that. And yes, it is that, but that's the sociological definition of that. And so when I came across that, and I started studying evolutionary psychology, and just so you know, my degree, I got 2 degrees. I have one in a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and I have a Bachelor of Science in behavioral psychology. So when I was and you probably read this in the introduction of my book, is when I was in those classes, it was when I was writing, kind of a late bloomer as far as my university experience is concerned, but I was writing this stuff, and I was seeing a lot of the same dynamics that I would see as far as behavioral psychology being used by women on guys. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And
everything which accents a woman's figure, the lipstick, right, which denotes sexual attraction, this is all based upon a man's being drawn towards youth and fertility, and even features being markers of good, so of good genes. So women, of course, are very aware of what drives a man's sexual desire, and they're constantly using it, not all, but in general, the whole makeup industry, the fashion industry, all of that is strongly designed to know deeply what attracts a man to a woman, and then manipulate it and put in hyper signals towards that. But I don't think men really kind of get that same thing, because they listen to women and say, well, what do you want? If you're hunting someone, as you point out, you're hunting an animal, you study in Spanish, say to women, what do you want? Well, I want romance, I want flowers, I want a man who listens, I want a man who supports me, and so on. And then into this lovely little kid's garden of fluffy animals and sentimentality strides 50 Shades of Grey, which is the most popular novel, if I remember rightly, in the history of the planet. I think it's soon to outsell the Bible. And that is what women want. That is the hyperstimulation for women. And he's not nice. And he does not romantic. And he doesn't listen to her. And he orders her around. And he makes a signed contract so he can beat the crap out of her. And women love that stuff. So what women say versus what they actually buy and respond to, complete worlds apart.
Well, I've got a post, and it's also a chapter in the book called "The Medium is the Message." And I think that a lot of guys want to we're deductive creatures. We're problem-solving guys. Okay, when men want to say 2 and 2 equals 4, and they want to find the shortest, point between 2 distances to solve a problem. And so what guys generally do is they apply that towards their game, okay? And what their game is whatever is going to get them from the point of not being intimate with a woman to being intimate with a woman. And so most guys follow that same deductive reasoning. If what do women want? Well, let's go find out what women want. I will do what women want. This plus this equals this. And what they're really not understanding is that as far as when it comes to hypergamy, there's really sort of the arousal side and then there's the attraction side. And they're all about the attraction side, but they know nothing about the arousal side, or vice versa. So it could be they know everything about the arousal side and know nothing about the attraction side of hypergamy. But I think that this deductive problem solving is where most guys sort of get themselves into trouble. Now, of course, on the medium is the message, it's just what you've been talking about, is watch what a woman does and not what a woman is saying that she wants. If she's, if she's ignoring your phone calls, or if it takes you, if she's making you wait for sex, or if it's this kind of stuff, that's the message. That is the message. That's what's being told to you, and it's not what she's saying is being told to you. So there's kind of this duplicity of messages in there. But there's also, I think the joke is that the pickup artists give women what they say that they never want. they pretend to have what women say that they never want.
Well, this is a funny thing too, because at least biologically speaking, for me at least, Rollo, let me know what you think, of course. For me, biologically speaking, there are two perspectives to males and females and mothers and fathers. Mothers face the children and fathers face the world. That's kind of the way it works, because moms are home raising the children and fathers are out there facing the world in order to get resources to bring to the family, because women were disabled by childbirth and by child raising. Basically, they would hit puberty, get pregnant, and die eventually, maybe from pregnancy, maybe from old age if they were lucky. And so the idea, when we have this situation or this system, biologically speaking, because we have this ridiculously slow to develop children, I mean, it's absolutely insane. Like mountains decay faster than children grow up sometimes. And so men have to be out there facing the world, and women have to be facing their children and raising the children. So the idea that the man goes to the woman and faces her goes against, I think, the basic biological imperative. So a woman is kind of saying, pay attention to me. And it's a shit test. Because if you pay attention to her, she doesn't want you. Because if you're paying attention to her, you're not out there fighting with the other men to get the resources she needs to raise her children. So pay attention to me. It's like this big test. And if you pay attention, she might put you in the beta orbit, but she's not going to put you in her bed.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the key, is that I'm glad you said that, because in the second book, I go into that quite a bit about the hierarchies of love, really, or how the natural hierarchy was from man to woman, woman to child, and then, child back to mother, mother back up to father. And we're getting away from that right now. And if you want to, like you were just saying, our natural evolved propensities is for that particular, with traditional gender roles, is basically what that is. And we can even see that in egalitarian countries right now, where given the opportunity to have complete, equality of opportunity, men and women opt for traditional gender roles in those countries, because that's what they're comfortable with, and that's what we're evolved to, to be, to get from point A to point B.
Well, and just to point out what a mind frack that is for feminists, the more free a country becomes, the more men and women settle into traditional gender roles. Men working with stuff, women working with people, and so on. And that, of course, goes very much. Feminism, of course, is a sort of it's socialism with granny panties. It's basically the idea that you can impose an ideology and somehow deny evolution. It's weird in a way, because there are some Christians who deny evolution but accept that men and women have natures that have evolved to be differently, or to be different. But most on the left accept evolution but then deny that there have been different evolutionary pressures on men than on women. And I just the fact that Christians accept the nature of man a lot more easily than a lot of leftists and socialists do is kind of funny in a way, because they need that blank slate so that they can create this massive oven of social experimentation.
Well, you see, it goes back to what our evolved propensities were. We evolved to, women evolved to be hypergamous. That hypergamy then creates male dominance hierarchies that come from that hypergamy. And so, we can complain all day long about a patriarchal society, but it is actually women who are creating that patriarchal society because of hypergamy. So, and
that's why we have a civilization, right? It's why we have a civilization, because the more resources you get, the higher quality female you get in general. And so we have a civilization because women choose higher performing men. And because we are selected to be higher performing, we end up with very high performing men and a civilization. And when that is interfered with, when women can gain resources from the state rather than from men, you end up with a growth, not of civilization, which isn't generally the minimizing of the state, but you end up with women then hypergamying with the state. And then you end up not with the growth of male competence and power and civilization, you end up with the growth of state power, largely through debt, which is catastrophic in the long run.
And what you will see in that situation is you will see men adapt to that. So when the sexual revolution occurred, you know, gosh, we're in the 60s now, the mid-60s, you will see now we have the free love generation. And I think a lot of people don't understand this, but the free love kind of thing has been around for a long time. There's been other times in different time periods where the free love thing was going on as well. In the 60s, that's just the most recent version of that. But what we're seeing is exactly what you're saying there, is women can now be in control of the birthing. And what do we see? Because they have almost unilateral control over their own birthing process, we see them move to a very unregulated, unfettered form of hypergamy. And like what you're just saying is that now we have resource transfer from men to women, and it's taking over I'll just try to be nice about this, you know, the alpha seed and beta need, or alpha fucks and beta bucks. It's taking over the beta buck side of things, where they don't have to worry about it, whether it's through whether it's through the government, or it's resource transfer, or it's the law, or it's having, you know, domestic violence laws favor women over men. It's that kind of insurance and that kind of a certainty of security for that woman. And what is left for her? Well, there's only the alpha fuck side of things that are left for her. So what are men going to adapt to be? They're going to adapt to be that guy who's going to get with the higher quality woman. So now the competition in the male dominance hierarchy is not so much based on, you know, having a good job, being a nice guy, and all the stuff that was great right before the sexual revolution. Now it's, how good can I look? You know, can I get six-pack abs? Can I, you know, can I attract and can I appeal to the arousal side of that woman more so than the security side of things? And I think really that's one of the reasons why you're seeing things like Me Too and Time's Up right now, because men are adapting to be more sexual and to be more part of, you know, be qualifying themselves, I should say, for that arousal side rather than the attraction side, which is the security-based side of things.
Well, and it's terrible because as a man, this goes back to a Strindberg play I read in college decades ago, that the woman always knows the child is hers, but the man does not, in general.
Right.
Again, in a more, like in Japan, you don't know because it's a racially homogenous society. In other cultures, you might have some clue. But to me, understanding that issue, that a man must ensure to the very best of his ability, and society requires this occur, because men go get resources in order to have children. But if the resources are being applied to a child that's not from their own genes, it's not their sperm child, that is the most catastrophic mistake a man can make. Like the worst mistake a woman can make in the past, before the welfare state, is to get married to a man who then leaves her when she's had children, because then no other man wants to be with her. She's got to rely on charity. I mean, her life is ruined, which is why there used to be a big vetting process, and you wouldn't just go on Tinder. Like you'd have to have, you'd vouched for by the priest, by the community, by the family, the extended family. You investigate this guy's family, you look at his history, because that was the worst. So the worst thing the woman can do is to marry a man who splits, and the worst thing a man can do is raise children that aren't his own. And this fundamental problem is one of the reasons why there is, of course, no sex before marriage, no hymen, no diamond. It's why there were chastity belts. It's why, because, you know, as you point out, war widows, right? Men go away, women will have, oh, yes, it was that time you came back on leave, honey, really. That's why he's got red hair and you're a brunette. So to me, this issue of raising another man's children has now been thoroughly institutionalized, in that you and I, as taxpayers, are now paying to raise other men's children through the welfare state. Now, we used to be able to do that voluntarily through charity, but charity was very restrictive and nobody really wanted it, very social shaming to be on. Being forced to pay for other men's children is just astoundingly horrifying, and it could only happen in a society which completely devalued male perspectives.
Well, I was going to say, as I have a post that I wrote it probably about 3 weeks ago. It's called The War on Paternity. And it's exactly what you're talking about right now. And to sort of give you a build up to this, just what you were saying before, prior to the sexual revolution, we had checks and balances on hypergamy. So consequently, back in the day, it was very shameful for a woman to have a child out of wedlock. I mean, even as late as, the 50s and the 60s, up to mid-60s anyways, it was very shameful for a woman
she'd have to go away. She'd have to go away and pretend to have an abortion, or it would be pretended to be an oopsie child pre-menopause for the mom.
Right. Exactly. So we have these checks and balances, both socially, religiously, and culturally. Just depends on what the culture was. But there was always, even I would say, a good portion of traditional religions were very much about keeping that hypergamy in check, because there's a subconscious understanding of that. That's what's going to happen if we don't keep this in check. Now, what did we do when we gave women the unilateral control to birth? Well, now we have, women. What's the birth rate for unmarried out of wedlock births is 42% right now. We're looking at the rise of abortion. Again, more abortions occur because of this. And it was supposed to be the other way around. We were supposed to be able to have free love and not have to worry about, men wouldn't have to worry about their burden of performance anymore, because, I love you and you love me, and all of these horrible, we've risen ourselves above the evolutionary animals right now, and it's what counts on the inside, and it's not what's on the outside, which is complete horseshit. But what I was going to say is that what we're seeing right now is a war on paternity, and it's exactly what you just talked about. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are some studies, and I got these when I was in college. I'm just remembering them right now. But there's these studies about they would do these experiments with these men who would have to go and pick up their children from school, and it was like a parochial school, so all the kids are dressed up in the same outfits. So the only way you can identify those children was by looking at their faces. And it was facial recognition, right? And the fathers of those children could find those kids faster than the mothers could find those children.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, because that's part of the evolved part. It's that important to men to know that their progeny is their progeny.
And it's weird too, because if there have been studies, I still find it staggering that the numbers could be this high, but there have been studies. I remember, I think it was in Wales some decades ago, a teacher asked the students to do blood tests, like blood samples, and try to match up their parents' blood type with their blood type, and a third of the kids were not their father's kids. And this has happened in wartime as well. So, I don't know, let's say it's 10 or 20%, or whatever it is, right, that men are raising children that aren't their own. And this is not talked about. And in England, you have to get the mother's permission to even get a blood test to find out if you're the father. Now, so who knows? Let's say it's 10%. Let's say it's 5%, whatever it is. But can you imagine what would happen if 5 or 10% of babies were switched for moms in the hospital? Yeah. Like, people would go absolutely insane. People would go completely mental and say, what? The woman would say, I'm raising a child not even my own because the hospital made a mistake and switched the baby with someone else's 5% of the time, 10% of the time. But the fact that men really need to know that the children are their own is barely even talked about. Of course, as you know, young men who've been victims of rape by women have been forced to pay child support. Right. So men's perspective not being part of social calculations is something really chilling. Like, once you really see it, it is quite a brain explosion.
Well, I think that's interesting because, again, in that post, I was making the case that there's a war on paternity right now. It's sort of a social war on paternity. We hold up men who take the responsibility of parental investment for another man. That guy who marries the single mother with kids, that guy we hold up and say, oh, he's great. He's a hero and all that, for a while. But we don't look down on that guy. We look at the guy who steps up and wants to be, basically be a proactive cuckold is what I call it. Is there's the cuckoldry that happens before the marriage, and there's cuckoldry that happens after the marriage. So before the marriage, maybe the woman has had sex with her alpha lovers and has had kids with them, and then by the time she gets to be between the ages of, say, 29 and 31, then that's when she's looking for that beta guy who's going to be the good prospect and is going to be the guy who's going to help her raise these kids that aren't his kids. And so we hold that guy up as a hero. We look at paternity right now in a social aspect as we try to downplay that. I was just on a interview with Pat Campbell not too long ago, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about the CNN story that was just out last week about how they're trying to normalize cuckoldry. I mean, real, in-your-face, live, why is cuckoldry porn such a big thing right now? Well, what it is a devaluing of the importance of men having that investment or knowing that that's their kid. We see that in the laws, like you're talking about. We see that in the DNA, making it more and more difficult to get DNA testing. I'm going to, this is conjecture here, but I really think that once the male birth control pill comes out, I really think that feminism and feminists are really going to fight that, because it's going to take that, it's going to remove that control of birthing and hypergamy. It's going to put it back into the control of men.
Well, and this is another conflict in the narrative that really began to have me look at what was really going on, Rollo, which is this idea that women are empowered and amazing and strong and independent and so on, at the same time as they're begging for laws, a lot of them, that do their negotiating on behalf of them, right? So you have equal pay for work of equal status, right? And it's like, well, wait a minute. If women are so strong and empowered, why do they need the government to force men to pay them what they want? Why don't they just go up and negotiate for themselves? And then it sort of morphed into not even just like if you're in the same category, then it just becomes for work of equal value, which is a completely subjective. I mean, if you want to know how your work is valued, put it out there in the free market and see who pays for it voluntarily. It's not that complicated. Negotiate for more if you want it, and at some point you'll hit a ceiling. And this combination, sorry, let me just finish. This combination of female empowerment, the strong, independent female with a little registered trademark that you have in the books, very good, combined with running to the government every time there's a problem. It's like the kid who's a bully who then, when somebody turns around on him, just goes and runs to the teacher and tries to get someone in trouble from the hierarchy. That is, to me, a pretty wild combination that's very tough to reconcile.
Well, I was going to say is that it comes down to them wanting an equality of outcome as per an equality of opportunity for that. And I can understand that, but even when they have the equality of opportunity, what happens? What choices do they make when they have that equality of opportunity? That then affects the outcome of the choices that they themselves have made. So yes, they want it both ways. They want it to be controlled on the side of having that opportunity, and they want it on the side of the outcome as well. So basically what it is I want to get on the roller coaster, and I want it to be this great experience for me, and I want it to pop up spontaneously wherever I want it to, but I want to know that behind the scenes there's always going to be people watching out for my best interests, and they're not going to let me fall. And it's like right before the car crashes into the wall, I want somebody to be able to take the wheel and turn it away from me and make sure that I'm okay. So I think that definitely comes back to women's need for security. And once again, we're going back to the hypergamous need for women to have that security side of things. So there's the genetic and the alpha seed side, and then there's the security side to know that their kids are going to be taken care of, and they're going to be taken care of. Because, I mean, women's sexual market value is perishable. Once they get to a certain point, that sexual market value declines. And I'm sure you've probably seen the graph I'm pretty infamous for, is noting when a woman's sexual market value is at its peak, which is what I peg right around 22, 23, which is also her highest fertility window for today. And then we see men take a lot longer to become as attractive as they possibly could be. So I peg that right around 34, 36 years old, because it takes longer for men to, get into that, establish themselves socially, mature-wise, career-wise, and then still to be good-looking enough to, to keep themselves in shape and to still, rock the other side of hypergamy as well.
Right. Now, this question has arisen to me. I want to get your thoughts on it around time horizons and deferral of gratification. So the one thing, as a father like yourself, the one thing that's pretty clear is I can go without food, my daughter can't, right? I can eat less, and it may not actually do me much harm. In fact, it may do me some good. I can eat less, and that's fine, no problem. But my daughter, growing up, she needs the food, or, irreparable damage might occur to her entire physical ecosystem. And this need for 3 hots and a cot, as they used to talk about, this need for 3 meals a day, for shelter, for protection, and so on, I think has meant that women have a shorter horizon of time preferences. And I think for men, you have to go out and you have to compete with other men. You have to take the big risks in order to get the big resources. It's win big, it's lose big, which is why men are clustered at the higher levels of IQ, much more so than women, because nature gambles where there's great rewards. And I think if we sort of look at the big picture politically, women's shorter time frame has a lot to do with why they go into such terrible, useless degrees. You know, like I really, really want to take, you know, lesbian dance strategy and end up making the same amount of money as some guy who took petroleum engineering, right? I mean, and the massive amounts of personal debt, of student debt. If you look at the welfare state, clearly it screws the next generation enormously. Like unfunded liabilities in America are north of $180 trillion, national debt north of 20 trillion. But it's like, I have to get food into my children's mouth right now. I can't wait, whereas the man can postpone, the man can save, and men save more than women, and men spend less on frivolities. You just go to the mall, it's all women's stores. And I think if you combine the power that the government has to transfer resources with the shorter time preferences for women, I think it's one of the things that's driven this massive welfare state, massive unfunded liabilities, and so on. And it means that women only have to vote. They don't actually have to choose a good man, and therefore the demand for male virtue goes down.
Well, again, what we come back to is equality of opportunity. Well, the thing is women want to have it all. We hear that all the time. Women want to have it all. And what that means is they want to have the same opportunities as a man. Well, the big the big punch in the face here is that men and women are not necessarily borderline functional equals, okay? Men and women are different. Unless, of course, you go to Google and then everybody's the same, right?
No, sorry, except for Republicans who are saying.
Exactly. What I was going to say is that there's a social narrative that wants to convince women that they can have the same opportunities that men can have. So we see women freezing their eggs until they can find Mr. Right to, you know, have a child when they're, you know, 40 some odd years old. And there are just simple biological differences between men and women that create an unequal setting between men and women. So you're not going to have that, as much as we want to masculinize women and as much as we want to put them as the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, there's only so much of those to go around, first of all. And the second of all, there's only so much time a woman has to do that. Just like what you were saying, I think one of the reasons that one thing we haven't really covered here is menopause. Women get to a point where they become, you know, effectively unreproductive beings at some stage. So there's actually
it's a rough transition. You know, it's, you know, there's sleeplessness with the baby, and then for a lot of women, there are the hot flashes, the sleep interruptions, the hormones. I mean, and it can go on for years. It is a tough transition. Men are just basically this block from puberty to death. You know, let's say I have one set of hormones, I have one thing to do. My body is pretty much the same, less hair, but everything else is pretty much the same. But women go through not just monthly, but this decades-long cycles of like, wow, there's a lot going on there.
But we're gonna try to convince women that they can have it all. We're gonna try to convince women that they can have the same life experience that a man can have, and the simple truth is they cannot do that because of simple biological realities.
Well, if they don't want to have children.
Yeah, if they don't want to have children.
But this is
even then, they've still got to get to a point where they're, you know, they're not attractive enough to hit the wall is what we call it. You know, they're going to hit the wall and not be as attractive enough to have other parts of their lives be what they think they can be later on in life. So, like, I've got a post up about, it's called Stalling for Time, and it's about how these women will, for the longest time, they wanted to say that they're freezing their eggs because they wanted to advance their careers, because it's so tough in a man's world that we have to really, you know, hunker down, and, well, that means that other things have to be sacrificed, and one of those things is finding a good man and finding, you know, settling down and having a marriage and having a good personal life. So in order to facilitate that, we're going to go and freeze our eggs. Well, the ugly truth comes out later and says, no, they still, you know, now later on when these women who have frozen their eggs are getting to be 40, 45 years old, they're like, no, I simply cannot find the right guy. And so what do we do then? We hold their hands and we say, that's okay. We've got sperm banks. We've got artificial insemination. We've got programs to help you be a single mother no matter what. If you can't find the right guy, you know, it's not your fault. It's because, you know, these guys can't step up and can't do what they think. It's always on those guys. But we're going to help you out with that.
Well, the egg freezing technology is not what everyone cracks it out to be.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you might as well just, throw a bunch of turkey eggs in a freezer and hope to get real turkeys in 20 years. But it's not quite as cracked up. And it is funny, too, but this basic reality that motherhood requires significant investment. I mean, the very basic act of breastfeeding. And I had a caller years ago on the show who was talking about what a great mom she was because she was working at a corporate job and, like a couple of times a day, she'd go into the toilet with a breast pump and like yank out the breast fluid and then freeze them, and then her nanny would give it. It's like, do you ever think that maybe you've drifted a little bit far from the organic raising of human beings when you're like, you've got basically a robot sucking on your nipples, pulling out the mom juice, which you could then freeze and have another woman. I mean, that's just weird. Mm-hmm. So if you do want to have kids, you should stay home with your kids and you should raise them and you should breastfeed them for the recommended 18 months. And if you're going to have another kid, it's going to take you out of the workforce for years. And then, of course, all that happens is that some other woman's going to have to take care of your kids should you go back to the workforce. And people wonder, like, why has the economy stopped growing? It's because we're educating women who end up becoming moms. And so, if you need two doctors in a village, and one is a man and one is a woman, and then the woman gets pregnant, you're now down one doctor. Like, you could have trained two men who wouldn't have to breastfeed and be pregnant and be disabled through all of that stuff. So you're down, you've educated two doctors, but you only have one doctor. And even when men and women are doctors, men work hundreds of hours more a year than women. So this shifting of resources towards educating women who end up dropping out of the workforce for considerable periods of time, or to the detriment if their children don't, you can like it or not like it, but basic economics tells us that that's one of the reasons why economies have slowed so much and why wage growth is so slow, is that the free market would allocate resources the most efficiently. And training women who are going to dump out of the workforce for 5 or 10 years and may not even come back is simply not that economically productive.
Well, I should also mention that we want to lower the standards for women to be in those positions to begin with. We want to make sure that we make special compensations for them to be able to breastfeed or to be able to have the time off for pregnancy leave. We want to take the space that men made, the competitive, nature of men, and all of the things we put together, whether it's competitive sports or if it's a business or if it's or it's politics or anything like that. We want to take that and we're going to go, oh, hold on, we're going to lower the basketball baskets down so that you can make a basket, okay? And also that we can change things so that things are more woman friendly in those environments. And really, what that does is it doesn't. First of all, it changes the game completely, and then second of all, it's not really a good measure of what men can be and what women can be if we're doing that, or if we're not doing ourselves any favor by, like I said, lowering the basketball net so that women can slam dunk.
Well, of course. I mean, it's very hard to resist equality of opportunity combined with equality of outcome. I mean, because equality of outcome makes you feel kind of shamed. Right? Like, if you don't even bother running the race, but you get a participation trophy, you feel kind of cheap. So you do have to have the illusion of equality of opportunity. But if you can also get, I want to be able to gamble in every casino and any casino, but I always want to win. It's like, well, sure. I mean, of course, everybody, and the fact that in Western society, by God, it seems impossible to say no to women as a whole. I mean, we have a female deferral society, and I think that comes out of the fact that arranged marriages were long gone in history, and women choose men, and therefore men have to please women. And this basic fact of needing to please women, combined with women outvoting and outliving men in a democratic system, has combined male subjugation to the preferences of women, which at a romantic level is not too bad, but you combine that with state power to redistribute resources, largely from male taxpayers to female consumers. Boy, you put those two things together, male deference plus state power, I mean, man alive, it is a power that corrupts from top to toe.
Wow. And then you see that today with the Women's March, and you see that, I think we're seeing that a whole lot more visibly now than we were before, particularly with the, with the election of Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. And I've got another post called the First Female President, where I kind of go into very, very similar to what you're just talking about, is that I think that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were kind of effigies, or they were kind of like placeholders for the he and the she. And what we're really seeing is we were seeing a battle between, the most the biggest parody of masculinity and the big, if there's a guy that you could say is the most easily parodied masculine alpha dude in the world, we're talking about Trump, okay? And you look at both these people have brands that go back as far as the 80s and into the 90s, and I really think that it's not so much a hatred of Trump as the person. I think it's more of a hatred of the fact that the man won and that it was her turn, but yet he took her turn away from her. Not
only did he win, but he keeps winning, and he keeps delivering more and more value. Literally value, like people getting thousands of dollars in bonuses, and minimum wage is being raised voluntarily, and companies investing hundreds of billions of dollars into America, and an admittedly fragile but still somewhat impressive rise in the stock market and so on. And so the fact that he said, these masculine principles of accountability, of individuality, of borders. Masculinity is required for there to be borders in a country. We know this all the way. I mean, what do the male chimpanzees do? Well, the female chimpanzees raise the kids and get some of the food, and the male chimpanzees roam around the perimeter to make sure that the borders are secure. It's the same thing with the male lions. The females hunt and the males make sure that no other males are coming in. So borders is a very masculine concept. This like open border stuff, that is a very feminine concept, because in some ways, invasions are an opportunity for hypergamy with regards to women, because whoever wins the fight, it's like provoke the fight and then have sex with the winner. That is a primitive and brutal, but not ineffective strategy for all female primates to use. And so the control that women have over the political process, not just in terms of often childless men and women being in charge, in particular in Europe, but women being the group that everyone has to pander to politically, is producing some, I think, seriously dangerous outcomes.
Mm-hmm. You're probably a good person to ask about this, because I have a theory here, and I believe that because of our hunter-gatherer beginnings, where men would have to go out and depend on each other on the hunt, and to go out and bring back resources, technically, bring back a kill or bring whatever. They were having to go and depend on each other. Really, that gave rise to what we presume are masculine traits, or conventionally masculine traits. And then we have the women who are at home taking care of, or the camp, in tribal units, taking care of the kids collectively, communally, taking care of the kids, gathering resources themselves. But having a much more social experience, I guess, having a much more interdependency and a collectivist experience with their kids, because they depended on each other for keeping those children alive. And like you were saying, if an invading tribe comes in, well, their first priority is to keep themselves alive and to keep the kids alive. And I really think that what we're seeing right now is when we put women into positions of power, and I really feel that today we're in what's called a feminine primary social order. It seems like men are running the show, but it's women who are creating the laws and who are the power behind the throne kind of thing. But I really think that one of the reasons that we see a rise in socialism and collectivism today is because we have that female primary social order. Because if you give women, there's studies that they've done where it said if you give women a certain amount of money, and they have to give it out to a group, distribute it to a group, they will distribute it evenly, as much as they can possibly do. Whereas if you give it to men, they'll go out and they'll give it by merit and who did the best job. And really, that's pretty much how male-dominated businesses are run. Actually, pretty much all businesses are run today. It's based on merit. You do a good job, you get more pay. Now you move women into that male space, and the first thing that they want to do is collectivize it, and they want to make it seem like it is more a more equitable thing. So again, equitability of opportunity and equality of outcome as well. They're trying to push into that, but they're trying to push it into a social structure that is inherently merit-based, or you can call it capitalism, and that's pretty much the basis of capitalism. But it's a merit-based program as opposed to the collectivist side of things. I just want to know what you really think about it.
Yeah, men benefit from competition and women benefit from cooperation. I mean, that's, I think, fairly clear. And a man who's ostracized can still go hunt on his own and might, in fact, do better, although the teamwork can sometimes be helpful for the bigger prey. But a woman who's ostracized is really doomed, because the woman is so dependent upon the conveyor belt of resources when her children are babies and young. It's really tough for her to go out and get her own food and get her own water, which was a long way, and you have to boil it. I mean, it's a big mess. She needs a lot of resources. So cooperation was pretty key. And I think it's not entirely accidental that if you look at more female-dominated cultures like Judaism, it has had significant roles in the development of, say, communism and socialism and so on, although this happens in WASPy countries as well. And I do think that the children who grow up without fathers, well, they still need resources, they still need security, and women simply turn to the state instead. Now, once you're dependent on the state, then you are going to really fight hard to defend state power, which is the source of your resources that you feel or perhaps do need to survive. And that is a huge thing. And I think it fundamentally changes the genetics of a society. You're taking resources from more responsible people and giving those resources to less responsible people. And we know that, I'm sure you know this as well, that conscientiousness is one of the big 5 personality traits. It's significantly genetic. So you're actually funding the spread of irresponsible genetics at the expense of responsible genetics, and then we wonder why we end up with chaotic countries full of debt.
Well, I'll tell you something that's kind of an aside story to this, but when I was at university and I was doing my work for psychology, I had child psychology classes that I had to, I think I even wrote about this in the book, but my favorite subject was my daughter at the time, and she was probably about 4 or 5 years old, and I would notice the difference between little boys interacting with little boys and little girls acting with little girls. And it's just what you were just saying a minute ago. It's like the worst thing that can possibly happen to a little girl is that she is cast out from the group. That she and how old is your daughter?
She's 9.
You're gonna get. Maybe you already dealt with this, but it's like that's one of the reasons why we see social media being so dangerous to women right now, or to young girls particularly. And I really think that there needs to be sort of a regulation for that from fathers to their daughters right now. To regulate their chance at social media, because social media is, if you look at the collectivist nature of women, or you look at like that group dynamic that they have going on when they're little girls. When women get to be older, they're just the same little girls, but they're just doing it in a different context than what they used to do before. And so it's like casting out the out member, of your peer clutch to punish that person. And then within that peer clutch, attention is the coin of the realm. It's the coin of the realm in girl world. It's like how much attention that you can draw to yourself is how women establish their own dominance hierarchies. And so you'll see a lot of, intergroup fighting. It's not really combat so much. I always say that, men fight out here and women fight back here. So it's always a psychological type thing. But I really think that collectivist nature is definitely an evolved genetic part of women's mental firmware.
Yeah, men gain their resources through material reality, and women gain their resources through relationships. Again, these are broad generalizations, and there's lots of exceptions and so on. But in general, evolutionarily speaking, that's kind of the way that it worked. And so, given that men get their resources from objective reality, the fact that men are more interested in working with objective reality, computers and engineering and physics and math and all that kind of stuff, well, that makes perfect sense, how we evolved. Whereas because women get their resources from relationships, their relationships to men, and also their relationships with other women, because one resource is who can watch my kids while I go and do X, Y, or Z, or person, who knows, right? But so the fact that men are generally drawn towards more objective reality disciplines and women are more drawn towards relationship disciplines, or it makes perfect sense. And none of this, the funny thing is that people think this makes either gender better or worse, superior or inferior, which to me is completely incomprehensible. Saying that there's inferiority or superiority between genders or ethnicities or races, completely incomprehensible. It's evolution. It's like saying, hey man, I need to finish this jigsaw puzzle. There are 2 pieces left. They're shaped differently. Which one is better? It's like, well, you kind of need them both. And the fact that they're shaped differently is good, because if they were shaped the same, you'd never be able to finish your jigsaw puzzle. So it's funny when we talk about differences, there are so many people who automatically ascribe superiority versus inferiority, which is really the essence of identity politics, which is like, hey, there are differences. Oh, so you're saying that one is better and one is worse. It's like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I've got meat, I got potatoes on my, which is better, which is worse, like they're complementary. It's not like, we're not like 2 pieces of paper that you push together, one are going to go on top, one are going to go on bottom. And this kind of weird thing where all differences must result in some fundamental superiority or inferiority is really horrible, because it takes away our capacity to look at basic biological differences in bodies, in mindsets, in the physical brain chemistry, Because the moment you point out a difference, you're somehow a supremacist or a misogynist, and it's like, that does not even closely follow logically.
Again, once again, it comes back to that they want an equality of outcome between the two genders. I get in trouble for this all the time too, because I would say, if you point out the difference, if you say women, and we can show you I can show you the brain scans of women's, synapses going, firing left and right as opposed to front and back for men. I can show you that in black and white, and the first thing out of someone's mouth is, "Oh, so you think that men are better than women?" I'm like, no, they're different. They're simply different, and they're complement. And the other thing is that most of the people who are doing this research are saying, funny how all of the things that the man is deficient in or would have deficiency in, women make up for that, and all the things that a woman would have that she's deficient in, men are going to be able to make up for that too. And that's why I've always said that men and women are complements to each other. They are not the equals of each other, but they are and again, it's like when we're talking about equality, we also have to say, well, what is the task assigned that we're going to measure this equality by? And so when we say, well, there should be just a baseline equality, this blank slate equality between men and women, and that goes back to equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. It's like, what are you built best to do? And I completely agree with you. I think that that men and women are complements to each other, but we have an adversarial situation going on socially right now where we want to pit the sexes against each other. And just like we were saying a little while ago, it's like, it was her turn and he won. And so now it's no longer about, what the issues were or any of this other shit. It's like he took that opportunity away from her because everyone was so damn sure that she was going to be the president.
Well, I guess if she hadn't cooked a whole bunch of confidential documents through her own private email server and sold 20% of America's uranium to Russia. Anyway, so this question of inequality and difference is really quite frustrating. And it also has something to do, I think, with the other great challenge of being any kind of public intellectual figure is, and I can hear, I can read the comments in my mind scrolling by below this particular conversation, which is, oh yeah, well, I know a woman who does the exact opposite of the generalities. It's like, oh, come on. I mean, I know a tall Chinese guy. I know a short Danish guy, I know an albino guy in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, none of this makes any sense, but it is weird to me. But it's a male perspective, and I still have a tough time understanding it, and it is fundamentally annoying because it's so factually incorrect, which is, why on earth would you take a general principle supported by reason, science, biology, and evidence? Why would you take a general principle, take a personally experienced exception, and think you're saying anything of any use whatsoever? Why would you? Well, in my personal experience, it's like, no, the plural of anecdote is not data. The plural of your personal experience is not objective fact. And it seems like it's not a great argument, but I'll say it anyway. It seems like the more women have moved into public intellectual and academic and educational spheres, the more you get this philosophy of feels, this fascism of feelings, and this idea that you can establish the truth through your own personal anecdotes and think that you're talking about anything real at all.
Well, getting back again to what we're talking about as far as us living in a feminine primary social order, that's the frustration you're having right there, is because over the last few generations we've acculturated men to think like women. So women are going to be thinking, well, I can show you one exception to that rule. So, or I had an experience, and that experience makes, what we're talking about, the universal, cosmic reality of everything. One of the, if you look in, I think it was the last book I wrote, I am a very strong proponent of the fact that I truly believe that women have a inborn, innate sense of solipsism, meaning that they're thinking about what is best for themselves and, what is best for their children. But anything that is outside of that is either inconsequential, or it's only consequential in as far as it affects them. So
I just wanted to interrupt. Sorry, very, very briefly. I just wanted to mention that I really liked that you used the more neutral term solipsism rather than narcissism, which has, of course, a negative connotation. And I try never to ascribe moral negatives to stuff developed by evolution because that's ridiculous.
Right. Well, and I in the book I also say, you know, solipsism is not narcissism. I try to make a differentiation between those two as well, because I honestly think that it is something that women can't really. It's something it runs in the hindbrain subroutines, you know, where it's like they're always thinking about themselves because they have to. Because what were they thinking about, you know, back in our hunter-gatherer days? Survival. That's what, you know, there's nothing more solipsistic than saying, oh, well, my husband's dead and the invading tribe has just come in. I guess I love these guys, you know, because you know, whatever's going to be best for them, whatever's going to work for them. And so, you know, we have this collectivist side of things going when we get a bunch of women together in a group. But when we get one woman together, she is the army of one. Whatever affects her ends up becoming the universal truth. And I think a lot of guys today are sort of picking up on that because they've been feminized, because they've been acculturated in a society that has taught them to think like women and to put women as their, what I call their mental point of origin. They want to put women's thoughts and put, you know, how's this going to affect a woman before it's going to affect me or anybody else.
Well, no, right? There's no backup position to that. I mean, you've got this quote from Hillary Clinton in the book, where Hillary Clinton was basically saying, yeah, women are the real victims of war. Because, you know, women end up losing their providers. Women sometimes, do you know, Rollo, it's absolutely appalling. Okay, it's true that men get regularly dismembered, disassembled, and turned into nuclear shadows in war, but women sometimes have to move. Like they have to leave their house and sometimes go somewhere else because of war. That really, and it's sort of like, it's not even like, well, women are the real victims. They're 10, but men are 9.5. It's like women are the real victims, and the hundreds of millions of male deaths in the 20th century alone through war don't exist. Right. They don't exist. And so to me, like when you get that, just how indifferent, like female genital mutilation, illegal, immoral, male genital mutilation, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Well, I mean, I saw a movie, sorry, I think it was called Bad Moms. I saw a movie where the women were talking about how gross and unpleasant uncircumcised penises were, right? And it's like, if you could imagine making a movie where men were talking about how gross and flabby unmutilated female genitals were, I mean, everybody would go insane. They would go insane. This absolute weird lack of compassion for men. The higher male suicide rates, how men get chewed up in divorce courts, the massive overrepresentation of male deaths in the workforce and so on, the fact that men, particularly white men, are dying sooner and sooner these days. It's the first decline in longevity in over a century. This massive indifference, the fact that boys are so ridiculously discriminated against in schools that if you take gender off tests, boys' marks go up considerably because the female teachers just mark them down because of sexism. And you could go on, but the massive indifference to the suffering and frustration and fear of men, to the point where men are afraid of dating, they're afraid of buying women a drink, they're afraid of getting married, they're afraid of becoming fathers. The entire purpose of masculinity, as defined as a gender, is to create and nurture a family. And that identity is being stripped from so many men, having seen these giant smoking craters of where their fathers were after the women in the courts got through with them in divorce settlements. This absolute indifference, the fact that women are taking so much money from male taxpayers through the force of the government, this massive indifference to the suffering of men. And then you put that smoking crater of rampant indifference next to the idea that women are empathetic nurturers, and it's like, I'm not quite seeing the connection here as much as some people are.
I know. A lot of, there's the social mythology that women have this really supernatural empathy for, you know, anyone and everyone. And of course, that goes back to the mother nurturer type thing, but again, goes back to you know, women's innate solipsism, like just what you're saying about the Hillary Clinton. In fact, I think I started that post out with that quote, which is, you know, women are the primary victims of war. And it's like, it doesn't even occur. It's not even an afterthought that what they're saying is ironic. Or,
and no one's saying you can't say that. Like, no one in her circle is saying, what, are you crazy?
Yeah. They're just, And so it's like when you got that, so you got this solipsism, and you line that up next to like what you're saying about this empathy. There's supposed to be this empathy, but there's not really. So it becomes this kind of paradox for them. But the other thing, and not to go too MRA on you here, is that, you know, what's the suicide rate of men to women is 5 times the rate of women, but we don't. we don't have a special month for that. We have breast cancer month, but we don't have, men are killing themselves month.
Where's the prostate cancer month?
Oh, yeah, we don't have anything like that.
Yeah.
And of course, then what do they say? Well, you guys should do it yourself. How come men aren't doing it? Well, how are we supposed to? We're disposable. We're not supposed to do that kind of stuff. We're supposed to be tough, right? We're supposed to be the guys that are take it on the chin and come back.
Well, excuse me, but fuck that perspective. That really pisses me off. No, because listen, you say, well, why don't men get together and organize? I'll tell you why they don't fucking get together and organize. Is because when I spoke at a men's rights conference in Detroit, I spoke under threats of violence, of bombs being placed in the venue. I spoke with fears of riots, and it's like trying to get together as conservatives at liberal universities. Say, well, why don't you do it more? It's like, I don't know, why didn't you ask the blacks in 1850 why they didn't organize unions? It's like, because they faced overwhelming violence if they tried. So don't give me this, men should just get up and do it. It's like, come on. Perhaps if you looked at the amount of violence, anytime men publicly try to express any kind of in-group preference. Woo.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, and if men get together, there's always this suspicion of them being homosexual, or they're crying about something that they shouldn't be crying about, because we all know men run the world, right? But that, and it's the same presumptions of male power when there's really no male power to it. So it's okay if you're homosexual and you get together and you want to have a parade, but if your guys getting together, for a weekend in Orlando, well, maybe that's not, you're not going to have the same level of acceptance to that as you would, because they think that's dangerous.
Well, of course, yeah.
I honestly think men getting together, they're definitely afraid of men banding together, just like the sisterhood. I mean, I would say that the women they put the sisterhood above everything else. I call it the sisterhood uber alles. Okay, that means that if you take Rachel Maddow and you take Gretchen Carlson or some other conservative woman on TV right now, and you put them together in the same show, and you start talking politics, they're going to fight like cats and dogs. But if you put me on there, you put you on there, and we start talking about what we've been talking about for the last hour here, they're going to band together, they're going to close ranks, and they're going to talk about what a son of a bitch you and I really are.
Well, see, we're not allowed to get angry. Of course. Mm-hmm. The livestock are not allowed to charge the fence. That's bad for the farmer. And, there's the old saying that says, if you want to know who's really in charge, just look at who you're not allowed to criticize. And you're not allowed to criticize women, or you're a woman hater. But you can bitch about men all day long, and you're not a misandrist. And if you ever want to know who's really enslaved, look at who's never allowed to get angry. Mm-hmm. And in particular, it's white males. You're just not allowed to have an in-group preference, and you're sure as hell not allowed to get angry, which makes perfect sense when you realize that we are generally the tax-paying livestock that keep the whole damn system afloat for the time being. So the idea that we would band together, that we would have solidarity. Yeah, two men who enjoy each other's company. It's a bromance. Can you imagine if you had, every time the girls went out, you think it's a lesbian love orgy? I mean, it would just be so disrespectful. But of course, men can't band together. They can't talk together. They can't share wisdom painfully accumulated over the last couple of decades, if not the last few thousands of years. They can't talk about some of the biological realities of female nature. They can't commiserate about how hard done by they are in society, because we're told that we're in charge. But I tell you, men are pretty competent. We did build pretty much an entire civilization that's the greatest, at least for the moment, in the history of the world. If we really were in charge, I don't think we'd design a system that would kill us off, that would emasculate our sons and inflate the egos of our daughters. I don't think we would design a system where we ended up paying tens of thousands of dollars a year in taxes to irresponsible women. I don't think we would design any of this kind of system. I don't think we design a system of these family courts where a woman can just make a phone call and destroy your life. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no way that if men were actually in charge of any of this, and we would not be criticized. We would not, I mean, if we didn't value free speech, right, if we were just like the nasty, evil patriarchs, then there would be laws against criticizing men, and there would be massive groups of men who would get out and protest against all of the endlessly negative portrayals of idiot men in the media. We would just go completely crazy on this stuff, and none of this happens, and yet still, magically, we're just in charge of everything. Yeah.
We're the secret power behind the throne is really women and not us. What I was going to say is that when I was last September, I went to a conference called the 21 convention, and it was the first time I ever experienced something like that. I have never I don't do public. I mean, like I said, this isn't my real life. I mean, I don't do this for a living. I have other things that I do for my, as part of my job. But to go out there and to meet these guys and to share this experience, right? It was really, it was really eye-opening, especially what you're just talking about right now, because when you get guys together like that, there's always going to be that risk of that ostracism, or somebody's going to pull a fire alarm, or somebody's going to, I have every expectancy that there's going to end up being some sort of protest at the next one that we do, because this last one just was too good for it to be left alone.
Or there's going to be some craptastic reporter who's going to be out there and distort it all as a sort of neo-Nazi rally, or there's going to be photos published and you're going to get doxxed, or people who are not groundbreaking in this essential realm. You don't know. You don't know. Just try LARPing as somebody who talks about these issues for a little while and see what kind of response you get, and then tell me all about the patriarchy. It'll be fascinating to hear. All right. Well, listen, I really, really appreciate your time. I wanted to recommend the website, therationalmale.com, twitter.com/rationalmale. The books are The Rational Male, Preventive Medicine, and The Rational Male Positive Masculinity. I look forward to your comments below. It's been a while since we've dipped into these. I've dipped into these issues, so I look forward to your feedback. Rollo Tomassi, Tomassi. You want to look him up and follow his excellent talks and so on. Thanks, my friend, for the time today. I greatly appreciate the conversation.
Good to meet you. All right.